Welcome to the Healthy Perspective Podcast with your host, chiropractor, entrepreneur, mentor, and author, Dr. Chris Boman. He'll break down and extract the secret sauce behind his own success and the success of some of the top leaders in every category and from around the world. Get ready for your weekly mental adjustment because shift is going to happen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Healthy Perspective Podcast. Today, we have Sipping Streams Tea Company founder, Jenny Tse. She was born in Hong Kong, but raised in Fairbanks, Alaska. She spent her summers selling her mother's vegetables at the local farmers market and was very active in the local community. Her vision for Sipping Streams began the summer of 2004, where she began to notice how tea brought different people together. Jenny is a certified tea specialist, educator, and speaker. Her custom hand blends and specialty tea have won numerous and first place for top Tea Infusionist competition at the World Tea Expo. 2 years ago, Sipping Streams started their first tea farm in Alaska and the first geo-powered tea farm in the world. Jenny, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Of course. So I'm so excited to talk with you. As we kind of talked about beforehand, I love talking about holistic health. I love talking about entrepreneurship, and I love talking about, farming, growing, just kind of like that agricultural aspect, no matter what side of it. So today should be a really fun podcast. I'm excited to just have a conversation, about all things, and hopefully it's interesting for people to learn maybe something new, and hopefully get another tool for the toolbox in holistic health and inspired if they're a e-commerce or entrepreneur. So hopefully it can hit all things. Why don't you just kind of start off with your story, how you kind of got started with selling things, your entrepreneurial story, and what kind of led you down the path of, more specializing in tea?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, so we were immigrants from Hong Kong, and my dad actually was here. He lived in Alaska quite a bit before he met my mother. So he left home at 13 years old, because his father, my grandfather, which I'll talk about later in my tea story, that he wasn't given a cent. My grandfather said, just, you got to make it on your own. Go find yourself a job. And it's different back then, okay? He was born in the 40s. So he left home at 13, became a chef, or an apprentice chef, and then traveled the world as a chef, essentially, on ships, cargo ships, cruise ships. He even cooked for Jackie Chan when he was just starting to rise up. Wow. When he was in this Chinese acrobatic group. So he knew all of them because he's the chef. He has to, cater for them. He remembers even where they were housed on the boat, and they didn't have a lot of money. So that acrobatic group was on the bottom of the boat. But anyways, so I grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska, with parents who were chefs who helped build actually the foundation of my town of all the Asian restaurants. It's kind of funny because my dad was the person that you would want as your right-hand man of establishing a bunch of restaurants. And then he went on to open his own restaurant. And then, unfortunately, his business partner, because my dad's not so good with money, his business partner handled all the finances and embezzled all the tax money. So my dad lost his multi-million-dollar dream. We were really wealthy, and then all of a sudden we weren't. And so growing up, we did all these side hustles as my father was having to deal with the bankruptcy. And so my father kept saying, don't ever own a business. Don't never have a business partner. And just the trauma of it, because that was he did so well for a while until he trusted someone else to literally be an equal partner. So we knew growing up, don't ever have a business partner and pick something stable. Be a doctor. Be more of the Asian dream. Be a doctor, be a teacher, be a social worker, something like that. So I grew up selling at the farmer's market. My mom loves plants. She specializes in Asian vegetables like bok choy, choy sum, gailan, all these things that you see in the Asian grocery store. She's so good at it. Everyone, all of our neighbors would say, she's got the greenest thumb. And if she can figure it out, she will grow it.
I love it.
And so as a kid, I'd sit at the farmer's market and she'd have to go back to the house and pick more vegetables because she'd just sell out like crazy.
Wow.
And then she was like, oh, well, if you want to learn how to like, sell your own stuff, you don't have to sell my vegetables. You're always good at these arts and crafts. Why don't you just sell these other things, soaps, bracelets, other things that you make? And, they really promoted our local farmers market to encourage entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew also Dad wouldn't like that. So I went to college studying athletic training. So sports medicine. Yes, I worked with chiropractors before too. I have nothing against chiropractors. I had to go see a chiropractor during COVID because of the way my work changed. And so the chair that I sat on, oh my goodness. Anyways, there's stories about like how I never thought I'd actually have to see a chiropractor. And then it was just so unexpected. Anyways, and it was not for my back. Okay. But anyways, so I went into studying athletic training, which is sports medicine, and physical education teaching. Two very stable careers, work in physical therapy, work in a high school, okay? Like I'm doing what my parents want me to do. So my last year of college, I started drinking tea because it was the cheapest thing on the coffee shop menu. My drink every day was $5.26 for one drink. A quad venti soy inverted caramel macchiato. I have high tolerance for caffeine. I can drink a pot of coffee before bed.
Wow.
And so I'm also lactose intolerant. And I was super particular about this drink. It was even always requested at 140 degrees. Like I just knew what I wanted every day. But then I was thinking, oh no, I got to pay these student loans back. This is like really wasteful of me to be spending all my student loans technically on my coffee drink that's not really just straight coffee. And so I grew up, going back a little bit, I grew up as a coffee drinker because in Alaska, it is a coffee drinking state. And being first, like the oldest in my family and immigrating here and in the early 80s, it was really hard for us to assimilate. So we didn't want to make waves. Also, that's kind of like a Chinese thing. It's like, don't make waves. But so, anything that was considered American, we just wanted to like blend in and not cause like controversy, especially because I went to school with my weird Chinese leftovers and kids tease me all the time and me speaking Chinese to my parents. So it's very different than it is nowadays where kids are taught to accept and explore like other different cultures. Back then when I was a kid, I got teased so much, other than they couldn't push it too far because I was very gifted athletic wise. So I could win like any team that I was on, like help that team win. So, but anyways, so I've been drinking coffee since I was about 4, and I was not a tea drinker, but every day when my grandparents were living with us, they would take shifts. Like my father's parents would come for a season and then they would leave back to Hong Kong, and then my mom's mom would come for a season, and they would rotate. So one of the things that my father's father did, the one that told him to leave home at 13, was every morning they would do this routine of this weird Chinese exercise thing in the living room. Like I didn't know what they were doing. It was like, you don't ask your grandparents anything, just the cultural difference back then. I'm like, okay, they're doing this weird thing in the living room in front of the TV. TV's not on. They just need the space for it. Turns out it's Tai Chi, right? And then my grandfather would do this weird thing with these ceramic clay cup things on the kitchen table. And turns out that was the Chinese tea ceremony. So he's drinking tea every morning, and then he'd go for a walk. Well, one of those days when I was a kid, my sister was like, I dare you to drink whatever that weird thing is that grandpa is doing with stuff on the table. Because we don't know. We have no clue, because we're young kids, and that divide between adults and children is really big. Other than in Chinese, you just observe, but you don't ask any questions. And if the adults want to tell you, they'll tell you. Otherwise, it's not important. So I started drinking this beverage, which happened to be tea, after my grandfather would leave. And I quickly realized I liked it so much that it was all gone. So I'd be like, oh no, he's going to know I stole it. So I can't just leave it on the kitchen table. I got to clean it up and put it away. So I'd put it away every time, thinking that, oh, maybe I'll think mom put it away or something like that. But anyways, years later, when I'm starting to drink the cheapest beverage on the coffee shop menu, which happened to be tea, people would start asking me questions. They're like, "Oh, are you drinking tea because you're Chinese?" I'm like,
Hmm.
"I've not drank tea ever in the 4 years that you've known me." I don't even understand. Like, okay, maybe I'm trying to like, be culturally diverse or
Mm-hmm.
something.
Mm-hmm.
Or another friend asked me, "Oh, are you drinking tea because you're a trainer? Like, I heard it's healthy for you. I
Hmm.
heard like it cures cancer." I'm like, I'm pretty sure it doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm pretty sure if it did just, cure cancer, everybody be drinking it right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of curious in the back of my head because of the teacher side of me. And so I would have to do research on case studies of rehab or whatever type of techniques in these
Yeah.
different medical publications. And I would find case studies actually on tea. Like if I was looking in the journal of sports medicine or whatever, I'm like, what? There's a tea study? I should read it. I should read it. So at least I could say something, because people are
Right.
asking me questions and I don't know. And so that was the beginning of my tea journey, was not because I grew up Chinese or that I drank it or even realized I drank it when I was a
Mm-hmm.
kid. It was because of wanting to know the science behind it.
Mm-hmm. I love it. That's amazing. And I love that, it's always been a part of your life. It's always been there, but never really been recognized until, yeah, it wasn't even like, oh, I want to know more. It's just I want to make sure I have an answer for my friends. Like that's awesome. And so what kind of research did you discover? What kind of lit the fire to like, oh, there's actually something to this. I want to pursue this more.
Yeah, there was an interesting study on people in like Scandinavia. I don't remember if it was Norway or where it was, but it was on men, white men or northern Scandinavian men. And it showed that there was correlation. And when you say correlation, like it was like
Mm-hmm.
medium correlation, it wasn't significant correlation of people who were regular tea drinkers that had tea 3 times a day to longevity, less incident of accidents happening to them, less incidence of heart disease, less incidence of like stress, anxiety, strokes, like just a lot of other things.
Wow.
Because I think at the beginning, it was like when they're starting just to do research to say, is there any relationship between people who drink tea and health and wellness? So that was one of the first research studies I found. But again, it was only on men. So when I told my friends, like, I don't know if it works for women, but I'm not even white and I'm not from Northern Scandinavia.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case study that they found, it must be the lifestyle of a tea drinker that they're looking at.
Hmm.
So I was like, huh, interesting. What does it mean to have a lifestyle of a tea drinker, right?
It's good.
And then as I was going on with my tea journey and understanding more tea flavors out there, like in the grocery store, I'm just going to the grocery store, buying all sorts of different tea
Mm-hmm.
bags. I had some red rose tea, had some Tazo tea, Lipton tea. I don't know what anything is
Mm-hmm.
really, like other
Mm-hmm.
than you put it in hot water. I don't know
Right.
there's a difference. And
Right.
as I'm discovering what I'm learning and telling to other people, people would tell me their tea experiences.
Hmm.
They would tell me what their favorite tea was, because I
Hmm.
don't even know what I
Yeah.
should be. And I
Right.
happened to come upon tea in tea that was the same tea flavor as my grandfather's tea.
Oh.
And I was like, what? And then I think a family friend at dinner was like, oh, yeah, this is a highly desired tea from China.
Hmm.
And in fact, they typically make them in these clay pots, these small Yixing clay pots, and you never wash them. They're family heirlooms. And I'm sitting there like, oh my
Wow.
gosh, I wash it every single time.
Yeah.
It's like, because you're washing off the flavor that's building on seasoning
Interesting.
these teapots. And then
Interesting.
my friend, he's like, family friend, he's very dramatic. He's like, people will kill you if you did that. Like they're worth thousands of dollars. And
Wow.
I'm just like, oh no. Well, my
Mm-hmm.
grandfather passed away, so oh well.
He'll never
I
know.
learned what I did. But and he said that it could taste like soap because the clay is porous. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if it ever tastes like soap. Like, because I washed it out like with soap and water. Um, but I was like, but no wonder I really like that tea, because it's literally one of my first experiences with tea. So when people
Mm.
ask me what my favorite tea is, I'm like, it's that tea Kuan Yin oolong. And because it reminds me of my grandfather. It reminds me of his bed and his pillow. Like when I didn't feel very good for some reason, I'd always go in his room. His room was always very comfy and cozy, and I'd smell his pillow. Like I don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
So it has very fond memories of
Yeah.
that. Some other research studies that I had found were on Japanese green teas, and that it was helping with memory retention and just like brain function health. And I was like, maybe there's something with drinking tea that can help with your memory, can help with like reduce of like dementia, maybe some, anti-depression. It didn't say those outright, but it kind of had the feeling when you're looking at the case studies and what they are finding as far as facts. I was like, I wonder if it does that too. I wonder if it possibly can do that too, because those components are kind of related in that way. When you look at the science of the components of the tea plant itself, and when I say tea, I'm talking about like green tea, black tea, oolong. I'm not talking about herbal teas. I'm just talking about one specific plant that can be made into all these varieties.
Right. Now, I love how you talk about too, that it's not just about the product, but it's about what tea does for community. And it's interesting, we have a small homestead. My wife likes to make, like, I think she's baking some sourdough right now. And it's been really interesting, just she'll post a picture of her sourdough and be like, oh, I want to learn. And so we'll have people come over and they'll just be having conversation, learning how to make bread and like that sort of thing. So I love how your journey is not just about the product, but it's about the community that the product builds. Can you speak a little bit to that? How tea, just kind of naturally leads people into community?
Yeah, that's actually why I started my tea business. So remember, I was taught never to start a business, and my father would definitely never give me his blessing, right? Definitely never. Now, 16 years into my business, now he's a little bit more okay with it.
Yeah.
But I could not have him involved or ask him questions or talk about my business in front of him or at the dinner table. So when I was working at the physical therapy clinic, I would make my cup of Lipton tea or whatever. And then remember, I still don't know that much about tea. And it was either drink Folgers or drink a Lipton tea bag. And so then I'd get my modalities out and do the ultrasounds on my knee patients or whatever. And these patients were mostly military. So they're from all over. And they'd see me have a tea bag while everyone else is drinking coffee or water. And so they'd say, oh, you drink tea? Oh, I remember drinking tea. I'm from Arkansas, and I would have sweet tea on the porch. And they would tell me their whole memory. These like very intimate stories about who they are, about their Aunt Sue or something like that. And then other people would tell me like, oh, I like my tea like this. And I didn't know how instantly, when you have like a tea bag tag hanging out of their little cup, that people who relate to tea, right, they see it, are going to talk to you about tea. It's like, oh, we're the secret club. And you showed like the password is like the tea bag tag or something like that. So I started hearing all these stories about all these different people with their experiences with tea. And it just helped me get to know my patients on a much deeper level. And then I would sit at the dinner table with my parents because we had a very awkward, I'm sure most families are pretty awkward, but my parents had a really hard lifestyle growing up. So we didn't ever hear stories about them when they were children because my dad fled China when he was a kid. I think he was like 7 years old during the Japanese invasion. My mom grew up in deep poverty. So they didn't have stories they wanted to share. They just didn't even want to relive the past. Neither did my grandparents either because they had to flee too. So I would just sit there and just start small talk at the dinner table and just talk about tea, what I learned about in tea. And then my mom would say, oh, your dad was born in a tea growing region. And he knows about all of this tea. And then my daddy would say, well, I didn't know that much about tea because we left at this time. I was still a kid, but I remember seeing the tea fields. Your grandfather knows way more about tea, or he knew way more about tea. And then I would talk about another topic that I learned about tea, like pu'er cakes. So one time I was talking about pu'er cakes, and I had this book, and I just brought it out at the dinner table while we're eating dinner, and I'm flipping through the pages, and my dad goes, I have that cake. And I was like, oh, you have pu'er in a flat cake? And he's like, no, I have that cake. And I said, there's no way, because this is like a vintage collector's book.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, my uncle gave it to me in stacks of 7 for all the oldest males in the family as like an heirloom, which made sense. They're in stacks of 7.
Hmm.
And then I was like, okay, well then prove it. Sure enough, all of his world travels that he's been to, he carried this cake with him because his rich uncle said this will be very valuable one day. And so we still have that cake, and we're like, wait, we gotta look at the tag. Like, let's look at the stamps on it. Is this authentic? And we opened it up, and my dad's like, oh, let's drink it. I'm like, we're not, and me at the dinner table was like, we're not drinking a $5,000 cake of pu'er. We're just putting it away. And so, anyways, it's just really interesting because we can come together even if we have hard pasts, hard memories, and talk about something more interesting and fun. And so when I started seeing this pattern, then I was later on, I'm working at the physical therapy clinic. Then I'm a high school teacher, and the parents want me to design a semester-long class on tea. They're like, you know a lot about tea. And I said, I don't know a lot about tea, but I'll try to research it.
I can learn, right?
Yeah, I can learn. I'm a teacher. That's what we do. We learn and try to figure it out. So I designed a whole curriculum on it. And again, it's connecting the parents with the kids. And then fast forward, I meet a business consultant from mainland China. And he's an American, but he's done business consulting in China for a long time, which are helping different indigenous people groups hold on to their culture.
I love it.
And he's like, I don't know anything about tea, but I can connect you to the right places. So the summer, I was teaching high school. Then on that summer break, I went to China and I was handing the airplane ticket to the customer service agent, like about to get on the jetway. I'm on the phone with one of the parents because I didn't have direct deposit. I was like, could you put my check in my bank, which is right across the street from the school? And she said, yes, but you're not going to have a job when you come back. Because instead of 12 kids, it was a very small private school. There's only 5 kids coming back. And I just sat in my airplane seat and I was like, I'm doing tea. This is what I'm doing. And I'm only doing tea because the way that I've seen it transform people's lives through community, relationships, like that case study of Northern Scandinavia. That it was more about like the lifestyle and the culture of a tea drinker. That's really powerful. I mean, it still sticks with me this day, is that people can take all sorts of supplements, all sorts of medication. Doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work unless you have the way of being to allow those things to come together.
It's good. Yeah. And you're so true, or you're so right, especially when you kind of reflect back on COVID, like people got so sick and anxious, and a lot of lifestyles went downhill massively, because even if those gentlemen or ladies that were coming to see you at the clinic, I'm sure they got much more than their knee rehabbed, having those conversations with you, and they benefit from this human connection that they have, where they feel like we're on equal footing. Like we're just talking about a mutually enjoyable topic. You're not teaching me, I'm not teaching you. We're not trying to rehab or therapy, like, you know what I mean? Like we're just genuinely having a human connection, which is layered in so many different ways. And so I love when you talk about the benefits of tea is not just like what's in the cup. It's who's holding the cup and the conversation going on around the cup and the many different cups that are there. And it can be, I've liked this term lately. It's such a bridge maker, where previously you don't know each other, you don't know much, how to talk, but to each other, but then you have a tea and it's like, oh, like, where does this come from? Or what, it just brings about curiosity and for some reason activates the mind and the desire to connect and whatnot. And I love that you've made a business with that centerpiece. You know what I mean? Like we have tea and it's obviously good quality tea, but use it for the purpose of, bridge making.
Exactly. And because of my personal journey with tea had to do with from the transformation of who I was, not because of a substance making me healthier
Yeah.
or preventing something, but it was the holistic side, right? We're
Yeah.
talking about holistic wellness. It's literally the epitome of how you approach something holistically
Yeah.
with the person as a human being,
It's good.
with feelings, with conversations, with community.
Yeah.
And even though tea technically is very healthy for you,
Yeah.
it's so much more than that. And that makes it so powerful because I
Yeah.
saw my life transformed. I see my parents' lives transformed
Mhm.
through the medium of tea. And when I say the medium of tea, not because they drink tea all the time. My dad
Yeah.
still drinks coffee. My husband still drinks coffee.
Mm-hmm.
I mostly drink tea, but I mean, if you just drink it as a beverage and isolate it,
Yeah.
it's not unique and special and looking at all the different ways
Right.
it can be so powerful.
Right. Yeah. And I love that it's better than, because you can share conversation over a wine or over beer or, like those sort of things. But this tea that anybody can drink, like you said, it can be a bridge between parents and their kids. Like you can't share a beer with your 5-year-old or your 7-year-old or like,
You
whatever it
shouldn't.
is. You shouldn't. Yeah. But tea is something that like, the kid can feel all grown up because they're having the same drink that mommy get. Coffee too. Like we don't share our coffee with our kids. They sneak a gulp every now and then. But for the most part, this is something they can feel special and want and enjoy and whatnot too. And then you've kind of taken it that step further where not only are you cultivating the community around tea and the product and educating about the product, but now you started growing it. And the harvesting of the other botanicals that you put in there, like that seems like an all-inclusive family deal. Like, okay, we're gonna go look for
Yes.
the chamomile. Like, you know what I mean? Like, let's go look for this flower. Like, whoever finds the most, win, or whatever it is. But what is it about? So what actually? Let's go a little bit scientific, and then we'll kind of jump back into this tea plant. Why don't you go a little bit into like what exactly is this tea plant? What conditions does it need to grow, and how have you created a space where you're at with very volatile weather to kind of create your own tea product?
Yeah, so during COVID, because I have a tea certification program that I teach and I teach people around the world. And so it got really big in COVID and I couldn't go visit the tea farms that I work with anymore because of COVID. I haven't since. It's
Wow.
just, it's hard to. There's some political things also going on in the world too. So I've just kept those relationships, but I'm not taking people with me to go to visit tea farms. And so I gifted everyone a tea plant. I already had tea plants at home. I just ordered them online, just experimented. It's not the same as going to a tea farm because I've been to them before, but I was like, well, let me gift all my tea students a tea plant so that I can actually show what stock of the plant does what, has what kind of flavor profile, the quality of the tea, because you don't know until you actually see a tea plant what that is. And now they could actually have it tangibly in their own home. And lots of people were gardening and stuff like that during COVID. So then my students were asking me, well, you know so much about tea. Isn't the next step to start a tea farm? And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm not starting a tea farm. Like, I remember even saying, I'm like, no, because I have a tea company that's award winning. We source all of our different teas from other places. We blend, we package. We're a retail store. We do pop-ups everywhere. We're a restaurant because, again, my parents' influence. So we have like Asian steamed dumplings, but also Victorian style tea parties. So it's like tea treats, but international.
Right.
So people always get confused. They're like, is this a Chinese restaurant? I'm like, no, it's a tea house.
Mm-hmm.
We have all sorts of tea treats here.
Right. I love it.
And so I was not going to take on this other load. So my husband, who is also very much like me, very scientifically minded, his background's in IT. He's like, well, what would it take to start a tea farm?
Mm-hmm.
And my scientific self is going to go blah, 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 and just tell you what it is, what it takes, right? So I go, it's got to be somewhere that's controlled. The only place that I can think of in interior Alaska is at Chena Hot Springs Resort. in his very first high tunnel greenhouse, which I volunteered at with our high school students. So I actually worked on the grounds before, and I know how their geothermal greenhouses work, because tea has to be grown in the soil. It cannot be hydroponic. It does not like sitting in water. It has to be well-drained soil. Otherwise, the roots actually stop absorbing water, because if it's a monsoon season, it will wash out all the minerals out of the tea plant.
Interesting.
And so it doesn't like sitting in water. So, but the soil has to be warm enough, because Alaska, at least Fairbanks, Alaska, where when I was a kid, easily was 60 below Fahrenheit for a week at a time. Like, the ground cannot freeze it so hard. Tea plants actually can have snow on them, but not our cold of snow, not sub-zero temperatures. And the first geothermal greenhouse has grow lights in it, can be controlled by the way that the water moves through the fins, like to radiate heat. And I think that's the only place, and plus because it's a covered high tunnel, so that means it's got like this visqueen type of material, you can control the humidity in it, because in Fairbanks, our humidity is about 25-30%. It's very dry here. Tea farms around the world want that misty mountain feel, like 60% humidity. So we would have to control the humidity, and because it's all enclosed, we could control the humidity. So we know the owner of Chena Hot Springs Resort on a personal level. He also married my husband and I.
Oh, wow.
So my husband goes, well, then just text him. And I was like, I'm not going to text him. He's like, what's he going to say? No. And I was like, that's right. He might say no. So the whole time I was hoping he'd say no. And then he said, yes, let's do it. So yeah, we just had our first tea wellness retreat.
Wow.
It's springtime in Alaska. It's past spring equinox now. So we have over more than 12 hours of sunlight here.
Awesome.
And the tea plants are starting to bolt. We prune them in February, so we can kind of like that bonsai effect to get them to have new buds and shoots. And so we had people fly in from all over the country for a tea wellness retreat, where they picked the most tender tea leaves of the 2 leaves in a bud, the bright green tender shoots, and then we hand rolled them and we dried them. And so they actually got to make their own green tea. So we just finished making the first flush of green tea, and flush means the first picking season.
Wow.
So it was a lot of praying that everything would be okay before these guests came.
Right.
But we got the tea plants to, well, we didn't get the tea plants to do. Nature got the tea plants, like with our parameters and making sure it was moist enough in there, and that the water, like the soil was wet enough and the leaves were not drying out, because there's only heat coming in one way, that's blowing dry air. And then we have these pond foggers. So if you're a mushroom farmer, you might know what we're talking about. You can build these like pond foggers that release humidity, a lot of humidity into a huge space. So we have 2 pond foggers in there. And we're always looking at the humidity of the greenhouse, but it drastically changes from one end to the other, because it's about like, I think it's 50 feet long or longer of a greenhouse. So from one end to the other, it's huge difference of what the tea plant goes through.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's incredible. I love now YouTube bonding, husband, you know what I mean? Like, this is my thing. This is what I want to research and whatnot. So kind of like a final question here. If people are interested in kind of checking out your website, it's like, all right, I'm interested. I didn't think I could ever be interested in tea or wanting to know more than buying the cheapest option on the Starbucks menu, or, you know, whatever it was. What would be some good introduction teas, loose leaf or whatever, to try from your website?
Yeah, so one of them, it's actually not the tea plant itself, but it is an evergreen tree, and it's grown all over South America. It's called yerba mate. And yerba mate is really, really popular because it has over 250 nutrients and minerals, including B vitamins. It has anti-anxiety and anti-depression effects with those B vitamin complexes. It's got lots of green, like vitamin K. It has lots of other antioxidants that are the same as the tea plant. Now, when we think about antioxidants in tea, most people are thinking about the published research on ECGC, but there's actually tons of different antioxidants out there that are in the tea plant, that are in yerba mate. And it also has L-theanine, which all green leafy plants, including the tea plant, has L-theanine, an amino acid that calms and relaxes the bronchioles. So that's why when you have a cold, you have chest congestion, or those people suffering through COVID, I was like, you need to drink Dragonwell green tea. That's the one I always recommend, is Dragonwell green tea. But moving into now that it's kind of springtime and people are getting busy and the change of seasons, yerba mate also has a lot of caffeine in it, which helps with energy and focus, but it's a calming energy because it has that counterbalance of that calming, soothing side of the amino acid L-theanine, but also other components that are in it too. So sometimes people go, oh, I'm not supposed to drink caffeine, because they're thinking of coffee, right?
Right.
But
Or
it's
Monsters
completely,
or something.
yes, a Monster, or like, don't drink anything out of a can that has like a million ingredients on it. You know, like maybe it was canned tea, like sparkling water and tea, that's fine. But you know, I always told my athletes, I'm like, if you can't pronounce this stuff, you probably shouldn't drink it in case you don't pass a drug test. But yerba mate is one we highly recommend in the springtime, just because there's a lot of changes. The sunlight is changing, right? Like for Alaska, seasonal affective disorder hits really hard in the springtime for people. And so that's one I would highly recommend. Or if it was a tea, I would highly recommend Dragonwell green tea, because again, it's a green tea. It's got a lot of nutrients. It's got theobromine in it that opens up the bronchioles. It's got methylxanthines, all different kinds. So there's like this constriction and dilation effect of the different components in green tea, like Dragonwell green tea, which is one of the most famous ones from China. And that is what is so good for circulation, which is correlated to cardiovascular health, right? Other than we can talk about plaques and stuff like that on a different time. But yeah.
I love it. Well, that's awesome. You've been such a wealth of information. I mean, I can see why people gravitate towards your classes and retreats and whatnot. And I've loved this conversation. I think people are going to have, like I said, just an opportunity to like dive into a different world for a little bit, you know what I mean? And get educated and hopefully adopt something that can help them in multiple different ways, from a health aspect, as you just mentioned, but also maybe they have a grandparent, or maybe they have a friend that they haven't gotten together with in a little while, and maybe inviting them to tea might be that bridge, you know, maker that will help rekindle that relationship or build community. So where can people go if they're interested in ordering from you?
So you can go to sippingstreams.com. And then I have a free gift for all of you who are interested in learning more about tea. Just go to sippingstreams.com/mybook, and you can actually get a free copy of my book, which is a great introductory to all the different health benefits of tea, but from a holistic perspective, like we talked about, in community, mindset, and gratitude.
Awesome. What a gift. Well, thank you, Jenny. I really appreciate having you on the show. I can't wait for people to listen. This is going to be a good one. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Healthy Perspective Podcast. To connect with Dr. Boman, follow him on Instagram @Dr. Chris Boman. Until next time, make shift happen.